Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show Crosstalk. Well, today, President Vladimir Putin delivered his State of the Nation address before the Federal Assembly. It was a long speech, mostly focused on domestic affairs, economic problems as a result of the pandemic. You talked also about extensively about the pandemic and the impact it's had on Russia. And towards the end, he did discuss foreign policy. Again, no major announcements. Interestingly, he talked at some length about the recent apparently coup attempt in Belarus, which was uncovered by Russian security authorities and Belarusian security authorities. And he pointed to this as this is the kind of thing that Western powers engage in. And he pointed to what happened in Ukraine, and that this is something that Western powers just simply shrug their shoulders at because they never really think about what's the next step. What happens when you get rid of Lukashenko, just as much as they didn't really think about, well, what happens when you get rid of Yanukovych in Ukraine? This is what you get, what the mess that you have now in Ukraine. So he talked about that, and then he talked about Russian red lines, and that he warned the Western powers not to cross Russian red lines, and that no one should mistake Russia's openness to dialogue, readiness, in effect, as he was saying.
Patience.
Yeah, patience. Yeah, turning the other cheek. We tend to turn the other cheek. We don't get agitated very easily, but don't mistake that for weakness. So he made that, but said we're still open to dialogue. So in the meantime, on April the 19th, which is 2 days ago, there was a phone conversation between National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the Russian sort of equivalent of Jake Sullivan, National Security, Nikolai Patrushev. The U.S. readout was perfunctory, to say the least. It really was just about pretty much 2 sentences in which the gist of it was, they discussed preparations for the summit, the summit of the 2 presidents. The Russian readout was extremely lengthy and talked about the various international problems that they discussed, including Iran. But then it said that, which the Russian readout said, that we will not tolerate interference in our internal affairs. We will not tolerate constant sanctions. We will not tolerate being blamed for everything. None of this appears in the US readout. And so we kind of left, in this strange situation in which the Americans keep pressing for this summit, and the Russians sort of say, well, let's think about that, some way down the road. So again, Russia seems ready, open to dialogue, but I think rightly they're skeptical about these American entreaties, these sudden desperate entreaties for a summit. Well, a summit about what? And in fact, they're suggesting a summit in the summer to discuss what? I mean, what kind of preparations can be put into effect before the summer? So with all this going on, there's the relations between the US and Russia remain fraught, and American policy just seems unpredictable and completely meaningless. All right, Peter, what's your take?
Well, his address to the nation was much longer than usual. TASS news agency, they did all the background information for how many minutes, and well, they're very good at that. And so it was a lot longer. It was very fact-driven, almost to the point of being tedious, to be honest with you. I mean, he covered all of the major sectors of the economy, society, culture, and all that. But he's apt to do that, okay? It's very focused. on what the government is doing for the people, what he's going to tell the government to do for his people. And what some of the things was really quite interesting to me. Supply chains was mentioned up in reference to the pandemic, and almost everything about the economy was really interesting to me. It was like, you know, there are sanctions on people. These are my words, my interpretation. There are sanctions on those that want to invest in Russia. Okay, we can live with that. We have our own resources. We can do all of these things on our own. And it was actually quite optimistic. I thought it was very measured, but saying, you know, this is what we're doing with schools and teachers, demographics, because the pandemic interrupted Russia's demographic trends, which they're very serious about, because the population decline in the 1990s and the 2000s was quite significant, and they're really working hard to keep getting it built up again. And healthcare has a lot to do with it. He talked a lot about healthcare. It was really interesting.
Yeah, he does that. He does talk a lot about the healthcare. Yeah,
absolutely. And so this is kind of my preamble to your introduction here. Is that it's a scary, wild world out there, but we have a mission here, and we're not going to be diverted from it. Okay, and we have commitments and goals, and we're going to keep working towards it. And also, again, this is a question I've asked our good friend Dmitry Babich for many, many years. Is this patience, that the overt patience? You know, I'm sure behind closed doors they get pretty steamy about things, and every once in a while it's revealed. But basically, they'll continue the course here. And if you think you can cross us, well, it'll be at your peril. Okay, because and this is the fundamental point that I think he's made almost during his entire time in high office, is that Russia has interests, and you be aware of them. We tell you publicly, we make no secrets about our interests. They're very transparent about that. And if you tread on those lines, then you're going to get a swift, hard reaction. Yep. And it will be asymmetrical if necessary. See, this is, you know, the Blinkens and the others in this poorly hired foreign policy apparatus in this administration. It's really really mediocre. Is that they have to realize that we're not in the Cold War. That was always about symmetry. Some of us learned the word symmetry just because of the Cold War, okay? Because of arms control and all of these other things. Now we live in a very asymmetrical world. And so, you know, what the Kremlin is saying is that you may act, but we will react in maybe a way that you won't be expecting, okay? And it'll be on our terms and our timing. So be aware. And that's it. That's essentially what they're saying. Life here is going to go on. We have to deal with our own domestic problems. They're real ones. We see progress. We see deficiencies in other areas. Very blunt. I mean, very blunt for a head of state to talk about the condition of the nation. Also, it was no ideological bluster. I mean, it was remarkably devoid of that. Right. Essentially, he said, we have interests at home. Go ahead, jump in.
No, he's not given to ideological bluster. He's generally very measured. And the patience, I think, is the right policy for a country that is obviously not the equal of the United States. I mean, you know, the hotheads in Russia, you know, get angry, understandably, at humiliations and insults and say, yeah, let's go get them. But, you know, Putin realizes, well, you know, Russia is half the size of the United States. It doesn't have its economy. It doesn't have its huge military alliance that it can wield around the world. So it has to react in a measured way. So it's still a formidable power, but it's not the Soviet Union. I mean, it's not the equal of the Soviet Union, which had its Warsaw Pact and huge military. So, you know, that's I think the reason for the patience. The concern, I guess, that I have is, you know, it goes back to the same issue, which is, you know, because Russia is patient, because Russia wants good relations and wants friendly relations with everyone, whether, once again, we're going to go down this path of, well, look, I mean, Americans are being quite nice to us. They obviously want to work out a dialogue. You know, why don't we try them out? And then we could get another humiliation. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but it does give me concern that we could go down again this path of
I don't think so.
let's have good relations with the West and so on. So I mean, you may be right. I mean, I'm not saying.
I think that's over. And I think it's really been over since 2014 with the illegal overthrow of the democratically elected government in Ukraine. I think.
Well, they showed up for the summit in 2018.
But I think
yeah,
that,
they went. The Helsinki summit was in 2018, and that was an ambush, and that's what the concern is.
But that's part of it, and that was fully expected that something like that. I mean, it was. Who was ambushed? Trump was ambushed, not Putin. Okay, he was ambushed. Okay, my point is here is that ever since then, slowly but surely, methodically, they are reorienting their foreign policy. I mean, we had a couple of months ago, maybe even shorter than that, when Lavrov says, "Well, you know, we don't have the EU as a partner." I mean, the fact that he said that from Lavrov of all people. Yes. It tells you a lot. I mean, basically, the way I look at it is that the door is cracked. It's not open, it's cracked, okay? And if you want to walk in and talk, fine. But other than that, you know, you're trespassing, all right? And I think that, you know, the diplomatic tradition here is very, very strong, okay? And we're not going to have Putin ever make like a Khrushchev-like, you know, speech at the United Nations. It's just not in his DNA. It's not him, okay? Right. And so, but the way I look at it is that I think that Russia has different geopolitical priorities right now, and it has to protect itself from the West. I mean, because the West is an adversary, because they made themselves an adversary. Right. So I think what I look at it very differently is that I think this is a fundamental turn, because the West is in crisis. They have their own ideological problems, their economic problems, and they invent all of these stories to blame someone else for the professional managerial class, what they've done to the West for 60 years. And there's nothing Russia can do about it. So I think that, you know, we have to take the official pronouncements, but I think, you know, again, looking at all the things that he said during his speech is that we're basically on our own, and the people we have partnerships with around the world. China, for example, though I don't think he mentioned China once during the address. So I think we have to take it in its entirety. There's no way Putin's going to say, we're done, close the door, you know, lock it, you know, nail it up. No, he's not going to say that. But I think in fact, that's what's happening.
Well, I think so, because it's hard to know what the point of a summit would be. I mean, what's there to discuss? I mean, if there's an arms control treaty to sign, then you know, let's. Where is that treaty? There is.
You don't have to have a summit to.
Right, exactly, exactly. And then we talk about Iran again. You know, the Russian position is, you know, if you want to get back into the agreement, get back into the agreement. Don't bring us into it. You know, we have good relations with Iran. We're not going to lean on Iran. Afghanistan, you know, you want to leave Afghanistan, go ahead, leave. You don't need us to open the door for you. So, you know, they keep talking about it. And again, if you talk about Korea, then, you know, there are things that one can do with Korea, but America's not going to allow Russia in as a partner in the Korean discussion, because, of course, if it had, and would not have made it a kind of an issue between North Korea and the United States, then we might have got a little bit further if Russia and China had been brought in at an earlier stage. But instead, you know, the United States wanted to do it all by itself. So now, I mean, you know, now we're supposed to help you out again. You know, you pushed us out.
No, but just to, you know, give a little bit more detail with the Korean Peninsula issue, is that Russia and China already have a roadmap publicly made during the United Nations Security Council meeting. I remember it clearly. You know, the British and the French and the Americans are just, you know, pounding their chests, and it's just all noise. And then the Russians and the Chinese took their time, right, and they put out. And it was essentially, I don't think they declared it was joint, but it was the same thing. Right. And it's there. I mean, it's, you know, you want to use Russia and China's plan, go right ahead. We'd be happy to see it. Right. And we don't need the credit, but it would solve the problem. Right. Okay. Right. And the problem is that you won't let the two countries end their conflict diplomatically. Okay. And then when they do that, you can leave South Korea. We solve your problem. But of course, the military-industrial complex will never leave the peninsula.
Well, that's the thing that, I mean, the United States isn't really prepared to allow in anybody else. It always has to be on U.S. terms, and then
And
when
then
that
things
doesn't
don't get
work out,
solved.
it's a matter of, oh well, can you please come back in and try to help us out? So that's really the situation. So and then you have to then go back to what Russians feel very strongly about, which is interference in our internal affairs, particularly your sponsorship of Navalny and the protesters about Navalny, which are supposed to be taking place today. Um, and then, of course, there is the situation in Belarus, because this coup attempt, which apparently seems to have been a serious coup attempt, is clearly directed at Russia. It's an attempt to again take away from Russia a strategic and close ally. So that's what the Russians feel very strongly about. And there's no indication from Sullivan or anyone in the Biden team that they actually intend to respect that. It's like they're saying, well, yeah, hey, come here, let's have a summit. In the meantime, we just continue just.
Well, I mean, well, okay. Well, I mean, if I were the foreign ministry here, I would say, okay, we'll have a summit. Okay, we two things on the agenda here. You need to explain yourself, what you're doing in Belarus, and number two, would you get your protege in Kiev, Mr. Zelensky, to honor his government's commitments to the Minsk Accords? Right. Those two agenda items, sure, let's sit down and talk about it. And I mean, it will be like giving the people like Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken a 10-step program to, to sober up and see realities. Okay. I mean, yeah, we can have a summit there if you want, but those are the two issues. Okay. And, but of course they're so arrogant in Washington that they would never agree to such a thing. Never agree. I mean, essentially what they want to do is they want to negotiate the breakup of the Russian Federation. That's right. What they'll sit down and talk about.
That's exactly right. And that's what they plan on doing. And I think even it is interesting to figure out what's going on in Washington. Why are they suddenly so into this whole summit? Because in terms of Washington, the way Washington thinks, a summit is a very unpopular idea. I mean, you've got the Democrats who hate Putin. You've got the Republicans who hate Putin. You've got the entire think tank land who hate Putin. So there's no support there. Now, maybe they're thinking, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there is some half-baked geopolitical idea going on in their mind. Hey, why don't we use Russia as an ally against China? Why don't we just, what a great idea. We'll use them as an ally against China. That's great. Now, there may be some real serious thinking along those lines among these people. It's an absolutely nutty idea, but surprisingly, people who know nothing about foreign affairs think hey, that's a bloody good idea. We'll just do, remember Nixon, Kissinger, we're just going to turn it around.
I did officially study German, okay? And I lived in Berlin studying at the Goethe Institute. I didn't learn a whole lot of German, but I learned to drink beer. So I got something out of the trip. But there was a couple phrases in German I do remember and do like. Schnapsideen, okay? Schnapps, okay? That's a drink, okay? And you drink enough of it, you come up with crazy ideas, Schnapsideen. And so, yeah, let's see if we can separate Russia and China. Wow. I mean, but it sounds like you're talking to a junior high schooler, okay? Right. I mean, because that Washington swamp, that horse left bolted from the barn a long time ago. I mean, even if it was a good idea, which is ludicrous, why would Russia trust the West after all of this? Why? Right. You walk out of the Iran deal. Right. Okay. Your diplomats are involved in ceasefires in Syria, and then your Secretary of State just turns around in a matter of hours and literally blows it up. Right. Why should we trust you?
That's exactly right. The problem there is that they kind of learned about the sometime in grad school about the Sino-Soviet split, but what of course they don't realize is that relations between Russia and China have generally been pretty good. For centuries it was actually pretty good. Even during the Soviet period, for most of the Soviet period, relations between the Soviet Union and China were pretty good. I mean, Stalin had good relations with both Chiang Kai-shek and Mao. And even during Stalin's lifetime, he had good relations with Mao. You know, the split occurred later, and there was a phase in which they did have bad relations. But the idea that this is a kind of the permanent state, oh, Russia and China, they really hate each other. There's this terrible rivalry between them. No, there isn't. You know, historically, they've actually got on rather well.
On top of it, they have resolved their border issues. It's not talked about very much, but they've done it.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. So now maybe, who knows, in 100 years' time, they might have bad relations, but you can't make policy about what might happen in 100 years. At the moment, Russia and China are inseparable. There's no daylight between them. I mean, they are extremely close. They're in agreement on everything. The notion that, hey, why don't you join us as an ally against China? You know, you and China fight it out, and we'll be on the sidelines watching. Yeah, we're with you.
But the interesting thing in that is that, first of all, Russia doesn't have an ideological foreign policy. And interestingly enough, China, being a nominally communist country, also has no ideological foreign policy. It's the West that has an ideological foreign policy. And so this is what the Blinkens and the Sullivans can't understand, because they think in terms of this neoliberal, postmodernist, wokist paradigm, which is all nonsense, okay, and dysfunctional, and gives negative returns. But the Russians and the Chinese think of national interest, and they're straightforward about it. It's easy to articulate them. I mean, when you have the Blinkens tying themselves up in a pretzel in front of the whole world, in dealing, when a bilateral relationship, and he brings his secular Bible with him and starts reading chapter and verse. I mean, what's that?
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I think what the situation now is that both Russia and China see themselves as victims of Western aggression. And so they have a common interest in thwarting Western expansionism and the West's desire to surround them with military allies. And so there's a very strong common interest there. There's no common interest with Russia joining forces with NATO, the United States, Joseph Borrell, and that crowd. Why would they do that? What do they get out of it?
Where's the Belt and Road from the West?
Right.
It's not there. Right. It's not there. I mean, the Eurasian landmass, when I'm including Russia and China and everything in between and south, is that it has a young population, vast material resources, oil, zinc, coal, everything you can think of. I mean, it has everything, and it has a more or less and getting better educated population, and they're very young. It is going to be a dynamo. That's where the center of the world is going to be in the second half of this century, for sure. But what is Washington? Do they have 800 centers of economic growth around the world? No, they have 800 bases around the world. Okay, and China thinks in terms of economic development to its advantage, of course. That's part of its national interest. Let's not deny that. But see, the U.S. is that, John Bolton made it very clear that, our oil companies are interested in Venezuelan oil. Okay, I mean, that is a transparency also, is that, you don't try to integrate them as equals, you subjugate them. If they don't agree, then you destroy them. I don't see Russia and China doing that.
No, well, that's exactly it. And that kind of brings us back to Putin's speech, in which he talked precisely about overthrowing governments. Russia and China do not do that. That's not in their nature. That's they work with whomever they can work with. And
they even work with Kiev. They even work with Kiev.
Exactly. So they work with that, and therefore there's no reason for them to try to overthrow governments that they don't really agree with. Look at Maduro. I mean, they have good relations with Maduro, even though they don't really subscribe. Russia doesn't subscribe to any kind of socialist ideology. I mean, that was a long time ago. They have good relations with Cuba, again, even though Russia today doesn't subscribe to any socialist ideology. So it's an entirely pragmatic policy, and it's not driven by any kind of, the ideology that we have to have governments that agree with us and support us. That's not the way Russia and China think, and that makes them far more attractive as partners to many countries than to have the United States coming in there, giving them all sorts of lectures about human rights and gay marriage and wokeism and and transgender rights and whatever. They don't want to hear any of that. And they look at Russia and China. Russia and China don't do any of that. They don't say, "Hey, you have to adopt our Orthodox church," or anything like that.
Yeah, so there, I don't see the method to the madness coming out of the Biden administration. I mean, it's the further we get into the Biden administration, the more it's the bipartisan consensus. I mean, it just what they're doing is they're putting a new paint job on it. I mean, it's the same foreign policy in a different suit. Okay, essentially on the margins, some differences, of course, but it just shows you how impenetrable it is, isn't it? How detached it is from everything else. Yeah. And you watch these people, they just, like I keep saying, they tie themselves up into knots trying to justify what they're doing. I mean, it was bad that Trump is getting out of Afghanistan, but with Biden, well, maybe it's okay. I mean, what kind of sense is that? It doesn't make any sense. There's no coherence to it, okay? And it's not based in material reality. And I think that's the biggest difference that we have coming out of Russia and China and others in looking at the West, because the West is always looking through tinted glasses for some reason. Right. And I seriously don't see how that's in anyone's national interest.
Well, amusingly, the Republicans have reverted to type and are now attacking Biden for being soft on Putin. This after the Republicans had proudly declared, "We are now the party of the American working class." That's what we're all about. So that's it. So the American working class that is crying out for a confrontation with Russia. So Republicans have gone back, Chamber of Commerce, interventionism, and let's get even with Putin. That's great agenda.
But this is what this is what the Russiagate hoax. These are the sprouts of the hoax, because no matter, and this works for the national security state, is that no matter who holds power, you have to do our bidding, okay? Because it was now Biden will say Trump was a stooge, he was a traitor and all of that. Not me, I can deal with them. See how it caves in on him too. It caves on in all of them. Right. And that's why, Putin will finish on this in his speech, our red lines, cross them at your peril. It's very transparent.
Right. All right, Peter, we will maintain our laser-like focus on foreign policy in Washington as well as in events in Russia. So we are now on Rumble. Look us up there. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.